We want to get right to our midterm correspondents on the ground, stretched out across the country. Ali Vitali is in Florida as President Biden visits today. Guad Venegas is in Las Vegas, Nevada, ahead of Obama's campaign appearance tonight. And Blayne Alexander is in Cumming, Georgia. Vaughn Hillyard is in Phoenix, Arizona. Guys, we are down to the wire here. And Ali, you are in Florida. President Biden's there today. Talk a little bit about what we heard from him today. And the significance of this visit, Ali, is he hasn't really been going to battleground states, and he frankly hasn't been holding big rallies. Tonight he's going to be doing a little bit more politicking there in that key battleground state.
Yeah, and look, Florida has the reputation of being a battleground state. It's a place where races are regularly won and lost on razor-thin margins. But if you look at the polling here in the two top races that we're paying attention to, the Senate race and the governor's race, both Republican incumbents are actually polling well ahead of their Democratic challengers. So really, it is their re-election battles to lose. Nevertheless, Biden coming to the Sunshine State, hoping to turn out voters in key areas like this one, Miami-Dade County, which is regularly a Democratic stronghold. And it's striking the message that he's using. I'm so glad that you pulled that moment that he had talking about one of Senator Rick Scott's proposals that would endanger Social Security and Medicare. This is a state that has a large elderly population, a large group of voters who are regularly going to the polls. Biden really showing that all politics can be local, even as he talks about these national issues that Democrats have been spotlighting over the course of the last few months. It makes sense that he's trying to come to a place like this one, despite the fact that the landscape here is seemingly weighted in favor of Republicans. This is a place that in 2020, former President Trump lost. President Biden, though, part of an interesting story that we're seeing in places like Miami-Dade County. As I mentioned, it's where he's coming tonight, but it's also a Democratic stronghold. But you got to look at the ways that Republicans have been able to make inroads in places like this one. This is somewhere that Biden won in 2020, but only by 7 points. Compare that to 2016 when Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump here by about 30 points. It really does tell the story of Florida, why it's becoming more red. In part, it's because Republicans have done a lot to try to speak to Hispanic voters and win them to their side. This is an area that's going to tell a really interesting story come election night. Even if the polls are right, even if there are no surprises in these marquee races and Rubio and DeSantis both go on to new terms, there's still a really fascinating story happening on the ground here in Florida, Kristen.
There's no doubt about that, Ali. It's a really important point, and you've been there talking to voters, and you have the Republicans who are in the lead right now, Rubio and DeSantis. And I guess the question for a lot of folks is this last-minute stumping by President Biden, the other heavy hitters who are going to be there in the closing days, will it make a difference?
Yeah. I think that is the key question. But again, the goal here, where you look at Biden as going on the map, if you looked at a map of 2020, the places where Biden and Democrats did well, these are the blue pockets on a map that is otherwise pretty red when you get outside of the urban centers. It's why Biden is coming to a place like this, trying to remind Democratic voters that they need to get out. I will also note for you that early turnout is lower right now in Florida than it was in past midterms. It means that rallies like this one could actually be really important in maybe getting voters out of their homes who weren't planning on voting, who weren't energized, maybe because they've seen polls that show Republicans in the lead. This could be something that ends up making a difference in Florida. But at the same time, polls show this is not a matter of 1 or 2 points, especially not in the governor's race. DeSantis has continuously had, in some cases, a double-digit lead over Charlie Crist. So it would be something significant that Democrats have to overcome. Nevertheless, nothing is over till it's over, especially not in Florida. When I was here in the 18 midterms, I got stuck here because there are automatic recounts when races are within 0.5 or less, and both the governor and Senate races were in 18.
Yeah, important reality check there, Ali, from the ground, from someone who knows and who has lived it and experienced it firsthand. Guad, let me turn to you. Former President Obama in Nevada today. Look, he is someone who energizes not just Democrats, but independents, potentially suburban women, working class voters. What is the expectation there tonight? He's been pretty fired up, and he hasn't held back in terms of going after some of these Republican challengers. Today, he's going to be there campaigning for Governor Sisolak and Senator Cortez Masto.
Kristen, Democrats here hope that Obama brings that energy that we saw in Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan. They need it here. You mentioned the independents, the nonpartisan voters. In the days coming up to the midterm elections, we saw the number of nonpartisans increase. The number of people that began registering as nonpartisan increased to the point that now 1/3 of voters in Nevada consider themselves or have registered as nonpartisan. So they want Barack Obama to come here and do two things, essentially. He needs to energize those voters, the Democrat voters, to come out and vote. We're still in early voting. We have a few more days. It goes through Friday. So they want to get as many voters, the Democrats want to get as many voters as they can out. And then, of course, you still have Election Day. And also, Obama intends to speak to those undecided, nonpartisan voters all across the state so they can decide to both support the incumbent governor, Steve Sisolak, and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto. You look at the polls, that even the ones that were released this week, and it is very, very tight. Some of these polls do show a very narrow lead on the Democrat side, but that's within the margin of error. Others show a tie. For example, in the U.S. Senate race between Catherine Cortez Masto and Adam Laxalt, the New York Times poll this week showed them essentially tied at 47%. So this is what the Democrats are facing at the moment, and they're hoping they can get help from Obama.
Yeah, and as you say, former President Obama will be targeting those undecided voters, but also Latino voters. There's some real concerns about a lack of enthusiasm among Latino voters. Guad, very quickly before we get to Blayne, you know, Sisolak was doing much better in the early stages of this race. Now it's shifted. This race has gotten much tighter. You expect that to happen as you get closer to Election Day. But what have been the real stumbling blocks?
So when you look at both the big races here, right, the race for the Senate and the race for the governor, they're very different. I think when it comes to the race for the governor's seat, the Republicans had a large number of individuals running for that office before the primaries. Once the Republicans chose Joe Lombardo, and he was the Republican candidate, that message was unified with the Republicans. And what voters here, including Latino voters, have been telling me is that now that they have a candidate, Joe Lombardo, they have seen a much more moderate message from him when you compare it to the message that comes from Adam Laxalt, who's running for Senate. Adam Laxalt, someone who supports Donald Trump, who's friends with Ron DeSantis, who supports the election fraud, who's also against abortion. That's completely different from someone like Joe Lombardo, who has said he does not support the idea that there was election fraud. And he's also in the middle when it comes to abortion. He said in the last debate that although he himself did not support abortion, he did support the people of Nevada who have protected abortion rights in this state. So again, he's trying to keep those Republican voters on his side, but win over some of those nonpartisans. And this could be one of the reasons why the latest polls, in fact, some of these latest polls, in fact, have shown Lombardo with a very slight lead. And just very quickly, when it comes to those Latino voters, it is expected that 1 in 5 voters that will vote during the midterms will be Latinos, and they could swing the election one way or another here, Kristen.
Yeah, really critical. Great breakdown there, Guad. Blayne, let me turn to you. You are really kind of at the center of election excitement, if you will, right now, given the state of both the Senate and gubernatorial races there. You had former Vice President Mike Pence out campaigning for Brian Kemp. What did you hear from him today, and what's the strategy in this home stretch?
You know, Kristen, I want to first touch on the fact that he was even the person who was here campaigning for Governor Brian Kemp. I think that that's notable because I really think that his presence here today, really what we've seen in this race so far is that the influence of former President Donald Trump has really whittled down to nearly non-existent, at least in this race, as far as this race is concerned. That's why, you know, he doesn't have any plans to come here. He hasn't been here for this race. And that's why former Vice President Mike Pence was here stumping with Governor Brian Kemp. Now, when I talk to supporters in the crowd, both at this rally and other rallies, too, I've asked them about their support of Trump. What's really interesting to me is that they say, yeah, they voted for Trump. They would do it again. But that has not in any way dimmed or diminished their support for Governor Kemp, given their very public split. And so really what we're kind of seeing here in the state of Georgia is, yes, polls show, including the most recent poll from the New York Times, show that Governor Kemp has a 5-point lead over Stacey Abrams. That is just outside of the margin of error in that poll. But something that both candidates really are trying to drive home is don't listen to the polls. They're trying to get their supporters to go out for Governor Kemp, go out and act like we're 10 points behind. And for Stacey Abrams, essentially saying that polls, in her words, don't accurately represent the electorate that shows up. In fact, in her own words, she said, if the polls don't see you, I see you, and the only poll that matters is the one at the ballot box. Now, as for what we heard from the former vice president today, he really repeated something that we've often heard from Governor Kemp on the campaign trail, which is touting the fact that Georgia was the first state to reopen during COVID lockdowns. You remember that back in April of 2020, he received a lot of criticism for it. Well, he's now saying that that is essentially what let small businesses get back to work and kind of what is keeping the economy going. That's something that the former vice president repeatedly touted as well. I've got to say, when I talk to voters, it's something that they mention as well. Either small business owners saying they supported it, or some who told me they believe the state should have stayed closed for a bit longer. Kristen.
Yeah, and it's just so fascinating. I think you're right that we're seeing former Vice President Mike Pence. We haven't seen Trump yet in these closing days. And I interviewed Herschel Walker, and he said he'll come if I ask him to come. He's obviously endorsed Herschel Walker for the Senate race, but hasn't been stumping with him in these closing days. Vaughn, let me turn to you, because you have been tracking these new comments made by Kari Lake, in which she mocked what she tried to characterize as a lack of security that allowed the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Paul Pelosi, to get attacked. She then went on a show later in the evening, doubled down on her comments. My question for you, Vaughn, obviously it's not going to hurt her with her base, but could this impact her in the race overall, given that these margins are so close?
The margins are so close, and when we're talking about elections that could come down to hundreds or thousands of votes, I think it could very well so play a difference. At the same time, I don't think anybody is naive to who Kari Lake, the candidate, is here. This is somebody here who has spoken very bluntly, very openly. She has made comments, obviously not specifically about somebody getting attacked in their home in this sort of a manner before. But, during her primary, she talked about that John McCain was reaching up from his grave and was still in control of the Republican Party. This is somebody here who has not held back. Others could call it crass, others could call it direct. I'll let others make those determinations. But this is a Republican candidate who, over the course of the last year and a half, has not hid exactly the type of candidate that we've seen really try to draw a strong support, especially from those Trump backers who came out of record numbers in 2020. And right now in polling, it would indicate that she's got a decent shot to be the next governor of Arizona.
Vaughn, I have to ask you very quickly, there was some news in the Senate race today, which is that the Libertarian candidate in the Arizona Senate race dropped out, is now backing Blake Masters. How significant is this in his face-off with Mark Kelly? Number one,
that individual, Mark Victor, is still going to be on the ballot. It's too late to take his name off the ballot. He received some attention. It was when the Arizona Senate debate, the singular debate that took place with Blake Masters and Mark Kelly, and the Libertarian candidate took swipes at both of the individuals, including Blake Masters, not only over his position on abortion, and really a lack of clarity on several positions, including his position on whether the 2020 election was legitimate or not. And many folks were concerned on the Republican side, especially there was a poll that came out that showed him gaining at least several percentage points of support. And when you look at the numbers, those numbers coming from the likes of Blake Masters here. And so the Republican, in what again could be a battle that comes down to thousands of votes potentially, the hope is that potentially those who maybe were considering voting for the Libertarian choose to not acknowledge his name despite it being on the ballot and vote for the Republican candidate in the Senate race.
Well, these races are just largely all so incredibly close, particularly the Senate races. Guys, thank you so much for your fantastic reporting. Ali, Blayne, Vaughn, and Guad, really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.